Far off the coast of Australia, there is a lonely, windswept island. It looks empty, just sand and low bushes, but if you dig in the sand, you find something chilling: human bones. These are not the bones of ancient people. They are from a few hundred years ago. They tell a dark story that was almost forgotten, a story of a terrible time. What happened to these people on this empty island? To find the answer, we have to go back in time. To the year 1629. A magnificent ship called the Batavia was sailing the ocean. It was one of the biggest and best ships of its time, a real floating castle. The Batavia was not just big, it was also rich. Deep inside the ship were 12 chests filled with silver coins. There were also priceless jewels and other treasures. It was a floating treasure box, heading for a new world. But the real danger on this ship was not the ocean. It was the people. The man in charge was Commander Pelsiart, a good leader, but his second in command was a wicked man named Jeronimus Cornelisz. While the commander guided the ship, Cornelisz was making a secret plan. He did not want to follow orders. He wanted to take the ship for himself. He and a few other sailors planned to steal all the treasure. Then, one dark night, disaster struck. The Batavia slammed into a hidden reef of sharp coral. The sound was like the world breaking apart. The huge ship was torn open, its strong wood splintering into pieces. The beautiful floating castle was wrecked. Water rushed in. People were screaming. The ship was sinking, far from any help. Their long journey had ended in the worst way possible. Over 300 people made it off the sinking ship: men, women, and children. They were now stranded on a few tiny sandy islands. They had survived the crash, but their nightmare was just beginning. There was no food on these islands. There was no shelter from the hot sun. And worst of all, there was no fresh water to drink. They were surrounded by a huge, empty ocean, completely alone and afraid. The commander, a man named Pelsiart, looked at the survivors. He knew they were in terrible trouble. There was no food, no water, and no way to call for help. He made a very hard choice. He would take a small group and the ship's little boat. They would try to sail over 1,500 miles across the open ocean. It was a dangerous, almost impossible trip to a city called Batavia to get a rescue ship. But back on the island, one man was happy the commander was gone. His name was Jeronimus Cornelisz. He saw his chance. The shipwreck wasn't the end of his evil plan. It was the beginning of his own little kingdom. He gathered his followers, the men who had planned the mutiny with him. He told them a chilling secret. There was not enough fresh water on the island for everyone to live. He said some people would have to go. So Jeronimus played a cruel trick. He saw a group of soldiers who were loyal to the commander. These men were strong and could stop his evil plan. Their leader was a brave man named Hayes. Jeronimus sent these soldiers to another island, far away. He told them to search for water, pretending it was a very important job. But it was a lie. He never wanted them to come back. He hoped they would starve. With the good soldiers gone, Jeronimus and his men had all the weapons. They were now the bosses of the island. Picture this: you survive a huge shipwreck. You thank the stars you are alive. Then you realize the real monsters are the people you are stuck with. The good people on the island were trapped. Jeronimus and his followers began their terrible work. Anyone who was sick or weak or argued with them was quietly taken away and never seen again. The island of survivors became an island of fear, but far away, something incredible was happening. The soldiers that Jeronimus sent to die did not die. They had a secret of their own. Against all odds, Hayes and his men found a different island. And on this island, they found fresh water bubbling from the ground. They found birds and seals for food. They were not just surviving, they were getting stronger. On his own small island, the brave soldier Hayes knew he had to fight back. He and his men were the last hope. Using the only thing they could find, they built a small fort. They stacked up blocks of limestone, a type of rock, creating a wall to protect them from the evil men. The bad leader, Cornelisz, was getting angry. He knew the commander might return. He had to get rid of Hayes and his soldiers before any rescue ship could arrive. So he launched attack after attack. The two groups of survivors were now at war, fighting a bloody battle on their tiny, lonely islands. The final attack began. Hayes and his men were tired and hungry. The mutineers were climbing over their little fort. It seemed like the end. There was nowhere left to run. All hope was lost. But then, someone shouted. They pointed to the ocean. Far away on the edge of the water was a tiny shape. It was a sail. A real ship was coming. Against all odds, the commander had made it back. Rescue had arrived at the very last second. Commander Pelsaert was filled with joy to see people alive. But his joy turned to horror. The survivors told him everything. They told him about the evil plans, the terrible fights, and the innocent people who were lost. He could not believe what had happened while he was gone. The commander knew he could not wait to go back home for a trial. The things that happened here were too dark. Justice had to be done right here, on these islands of sorrow. So he decided to hold a court on the beach, a place that had seen so much pain. Imagine the fear and sadness during that trial. The survivors had to stand up and point to the men who had hurt them. They had to tell their stories one last time, so the commander would know the whole truth. The bright sun shone down on a very dark moment. The truth was now clear. Jeronimus Cornelisz and his closest followers were found to be the leaders of the evil acts. The commander's decision was quick. The worst of the mutineers were punished right there. It was a brutal and grim ending for them, a final, dark chapter to their terrible story. The remaining mutineers were put in chains and taken back on the ship as prisoners. The true survivors, the ones who had fought for what was right, were finally safe. They were weak and sad, but they had lived through the nightmare. The story of the Batavia became a famous warning for all sailors. It was a chilling tale about more than just a shipwreck. It was about how, when lost and far from home, the greatest danger isn't always the sea. Sometimes the real monster is inside people.